Thank you all for coming here today. I'd like to do a couple quick introductions before we get started. I'd like to introduce the Chairman of the Board of Supervisors, Martin Porches, the County Administrator, Ian McGahee, our Yuma County Sheriff, Leon Wilmot. We have our City Council member, Councilmember Knight, our City of Yuma Interim City Administrator, Jay Symington, our Police Chief, Tom Garrity, and our Fire Chief, Dusty Fields, and I'm Doug Nicholls, the Mayor in Yuma. Tonight, as we all know, is going to be the sunset of Title 42. And the question keeps coming up, what now? Well, I've been asking that question for 2 years, with no substantial response. But the issues are here today, and those issues are in the form of people literally at the border and crossing the border. We've had an increase in the last month from 300 to 1,000 people and more every day. We owe a debt of gratitude to our men and women in Border Patrol who have worked tirelessly to try to contain this situation, and the men and women at the Regional Center for Border Health who also work tirelessly to help with the flow of migrants out of the community after Border Patrol releases them. But we are now in a situation that we've never really been at before, and it's time. It's time that the President announce a declaration of national emergency. So today I wrote a letter to President Biden demonstrating and demanding that he declare a national state of emergency due to this immigration crisis. And in that demand, I demanded resources, not just money, but resources on the ground. Now we can protect our border the way it should have been protected from the beginning. It protects human life. The migrants that are crossing are experience exploitation, rape, and abuse, and neglect, men, women, and unaccompanied minors. This is not something that, as Americans, we would stand for in any other situation. Yet, the inaction of our government facilitates the continuation of that exploitation. There are detrimental impacts to our Yuma community. Our U.S. Border Patrol, who are valued friends and neighbors and family members, are taxed to exhaustion. Our hospital has had previous issues, and we know that we're headed to that same and a greater scenario yet again. And our NGOs, they do all have limits, and we are about ready to exceed those limits. And then there's something we don't talk about very often, and that's the national perception of our region. With this continual conversation about the migration of people through the border and the impact to our country, it also creates an impact to our community, the perception people have for tourism, for job creation, for locating their businesses. Those are real impacts that affect every person living in Yuma. And eventually, and I'll talk more about this later, we live under the fear of street releases. Yet the President has done nothing to aid us here and now, and actions need to be taken. I've proudly served the Yuma people for the last 9 years. I work hard to bring this message to anyone who will listen, and so many people have done the same. I've testified before the Senate House Subcommittee. I've held and participated in roundtables. I've worked with Arizona Governors Ducey and Hobbs, engaged routinely with our congressional delegation, with our Senators Sinema and Kelly, our Congress members Biggs, Gosar, Siscomani, Lesko, and Gallego. And I will not stop continuing to bring this message forward. So the President cannot stand by and say he was unaware. And we also get this common concept that we've seen this before, that we've been here before. We know how to do this. That is just simply not the case. Today is far greater than any previous situation in total numbers and in total duration. In 2021, we had an extreme 3 days where we had a large number of crossers. And at that time, I declared a local emergency in December. And since that time, we've had a couple instances where we've watched Title 42 almost be rescinded, and what happened along the border. We learned a lot during those situations. However, the federal government leadership didn't take those lessons into account. The need for a state of emergency for our nation is dire. Numerous immediate actions upon declaration of emergency are possible. A full response by FEMA and the National Guard, like they would in any other disaster, where they provide boots on the ground for housing, food, transportation, and healthcare. That would be the beginning. They could focus on real resources and not the promise of potential reimbursement for expenses that local governments and NGOs have to come up with today. The choice of communities in which releases happen in needs to be vetted completely. Small communities along the border have reduced resources, and it's a disparate impact to release people into communities that have struggled with these resources and don't have the size and capacity in their NGO structure that larger communities have. So larger communities get easier to absorb this situation, especially with appropriate resources from the federal government. But currently there's no funding available, and a directive from DHS to release locally is currently on the books. That could be done away with during a proclamation. The immigration judicial process could be made easier. This would allow those that truly need asylum help to get that help immediately and not wait years for a final declaration. But those that are looking to exploit the system, that are looking to take advantage of the good nature of our country, would be repatriated as they do not meet asylum criteria. And then we could also temporarily assign immigration judges to the border. That could be done physically or that could be done virtually. But either way, getting cases on the docket within weeks instead of years would have a dramatic impact to the flow we are experiencing today and into the future. These are all solutions that I've proposed and voiced to Congress and to the President in my most recent letter. It's a complex situation when you look at it throughout the whole country. But here today, in Yuma, it's not a complex situation. People are here. People's needs are simple, and they're here today. And through direct federal government action, those needs can be met. The federal government needs to stop pushing it upon local governments and NGOs to meet those needs. This is a federal issue. This is not a local issue. It needs to be addressed directly by the federal government. Mr. President, declare a national emergency and get real solutions on our border for our communities and for Yuma. That's the end of my prepared remarks. I'd also like to talk about some news that I just received prior to coming down. And I was notified by Border Patrol that beginning tomorrow in the morning, they're going to be releasing people within different sections of the greater Yuma community throughout the whole county. There will be 141 releases tomorrow, 96 within the city of Yuma. And these are people that have been vetted to at least to the point where Border Patrol has issued them notice to appear papers, in which wherever they end up living in the country, they are to follow up through the judicial process. Unfortunately, that process is years, 3 to 7 years, to get through that whole process. So that'll be an impact to our community. I ask everyone, all of our citizens, to remain calm. There's not people that are convicted of crimes that are being released. There's going to be single adults, and there's going to be family units. As it moves along, we look to try to find better solutions than we have today, working with the governor's office and working with our senators to work towards positive ends. But that's the situation we're at today. And the releases, just to make sure this is also out there, the releases are not going to be in neighborhoods. They're going to be in more commercial type areas that have resources that the migrants could then engage for their own ability to move along into wherever their ultimate destination is. So with that, I would like to invite our chairman of the Board of Supervisors forward to say any comments.
Thank you, Mayor. As you are aware, and if the ones that are not, I did send a letter yesterday to the President and also requesting assistance to provide more transportation, food, and funds to so we can have, support the shelters that are already in place. I also urge to declare a federal emergency to give the federal government the ability to send more resources and personnel to the border. Also, just an update. This morning, the administrator, Ian, and our deputy administrator, we met this morning, and the county will partially be opening the Yuma County Emergency Operations Center, EOC, and will be holding daily briefings to share updates and facilitate coordination of efforts between the county, cities, and town in Yuma County. We're monitoring the situation and prepared to act accordingly. This is, of course, to evolving situation, but our hope is by sharing information and facilitating cross-jurisdictional communication, we can meet these challenges. So that's something that we discussed this morning and be in place.
Is there any questions?
Yeah,
Sure.
we've talked before about how there's only 2 or 3 buses that leave town a day. The train comes once every couple of days. Are there any plans for the migrants who are being released, I guess, to put up shelters or any extra transportation for them to get on their way or to a bigger city where they can take more public transportation?
Those plans are in the works. We're working, primarily the main issue is funding, and so the state appears to have dedicated some funding that we're working with, and so we'll be working with the county, with Border Patrol, with the local NGOs to figure out exactly how that system's going to work. But the city's been working on plans here for the last several weeks to be ready for some sort of transportation hub. At this point, there's no desire to create a shelter. I think the sooner people get out of town, the quicker they'll get to their ultimate destination, and then it alleviates a lot of potential issues that arrive in the sheltering process. Yes?
So at this point, I know you said you guys are going to be releasing people into commercial areas.
Let me correct that. The Border Patrol will be releasing people.
Okay, Border Patrol will be releasing migrants into commercial areas. I think a lot of us have seen the scenes out of El Paso. Is there any fear that there are going to be people camping out on the streets or sleeping here for several days on end? And if so, what's going to be done if that's the case?
There's definitely that fear, and that is why the urgency of the message to the president is urgent. And that's the situation we're looking to avoid. So making sure that people have transportation options out of town to get to those destinations, either the shelters that are in place or to transportation options. That's the primary way we're going to try to avoid that. I don't know that it's completely avoidable, but everything's fluid. And right now with 141 people, we're going to see how that works.
Just a follow-up question
Sure.
to that. Do we expect to see more people being released into commercial areas within the next couple of days? I know we've talked about seeing an increase in migrants, expecting to see an increase within the next couple of days. So do we expect to have more releases?
I believe just understanding kind of the dynamics of the border and that the numbers are increasing day over day, that there's no additional capacity within the DHS system, and so it's up to, at this point, to the local governments and NGOs to figure out what that looks like, because I would anticipate that the numbers could increase. El Paso is a pretty extreme example, and I pray every day that we don't end up at that level, but that's why we're working so hard to prevent that.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Channel 42 is at 8:59 tonight, our time. What is your understanding of what Border Patrol and how law enforcement locally will respond leading up to and right after that as the policy changes?
Well, I know that the numbers are really high even today without Title 42 being removed. They're going to continue that general posture. There is a process called parole with conditions, which expedites the processing. So all that does is provide people the ability to be released sooner it doesn't reduce the number of people being released into our country. So from that perspective, I see it being a little bit easier on the Border Patrol side, but I don't see it being any relief on the community side. Any other questions, Mark?
Is there going to be more police presence in places where those migrants are released?
We are aware of when they're being released, and Chief, did you want to address how we're going to respond?
So the Yuma Police Department has, and working with our partners with the Sheriff's Office, the Border Patrol, Somerton, and St. Louis, we are working all together to make sure that the community remains safe and that everybody that's released remains safe. So it's going to be increased. If it calls for that, yes, we have those plans in place. But right now, with only 140, there's no alarm for it. Like the mayor said, these people have already been vetted. They have places they want to go, and it's just getting them to go there.
Yes.
And,
Could the county explain more what the emergency center is going to be doing? Can you clarify more what that's the purpose of that?
Thank you, Ian McGahee, County Administrator. The Emergency Operations Center right now would be a partial standing up of that center with the ultimate goal of facilitating cross-jurisdictional communication and coordination. This is a shared problem which none of us created. The federal government's failure to act created this problem, and really they should be the ones dealing with it. But in their absence, we're going to have to do it. And so by doing that together through the EOC, that's the first step.
Yes.
do you have a rough estimate of how much costs we've incurred recently for different things like this? Or are we taking away funds from other projects to help fund this? I know the hospital has been very vocal about saying $26 million spent on this alone. Is there any kind of rough estimate of that?
So at this point, the city of Yuma has spent no dollars on migrant. We've had on migrant issues. We have had a lot of time from employees invested in this situation. And to be clear, we have no dollars funded in this year's budget or next year's budget for any sort of migrant activity, sheltering, or transportation. So that's why the funding is the key part in the short term. So from that perspective, we have no really ability to project what this is going to cost. And so making sure we have committed funds either from the feds or from the state up front is important. And now the county has done a few things, so I think I'll turn that over to the county to talk about their funding.
How much money have you spent and what do you expect?
You know, I'm not sure if I can answer that question.
That's a fair question.
Oh, sure. So, right, the county has committed to providing porta potties at the border, really for two reasons: the humanitarian issue there, and then, of course, the integrity of the agricultural fields nearby. And we've spent, I want to say, $75,000 on the porta potties that are there, and that's going to continue and may have to expand as needed. But that's a continuing cost borne by the county, and we're going to continue to pay for those as needed.
Yes.
I know it's a complex situation, so it's a broad question, but can you explain exactly why Border Patrol is essentially going to need to drop migrants tomorrow? Why that number?
Well, I can't talk to you why that specific number, but in general, the process works where Border Patrol brings people in and they process them, and then they normally they would push them over to VRO in the ICE group. That's not been possible for over 2 years. And so they either look to work through other Border Patrol sectors to accommodate the flow, or they work with a local nonprofit. And right now, the surge is being experienced all across the border, so there are no Border Patrol sectors to surge people to. So we have to deal with all of it locally. So those that are not being repatriated to their home countries, are not being returned to any other country, then have to be accommodated somehow. And if they're not known as a criminal element, then they're released upon their own recognizances, generally to a nonprofit, preferably to a nonprofit that can then address their transportation needs to their sponsor city. When the capacity of Border Patrol and the capacity of the nonprofit are exceeded, then street releases are the next element.
Just to follow up, the folks there, the folks who are being dropped essentially, are they aware of the situation, or are they having this explained to them what is happening?
You know, I really couldn't talk to the element of what they're being told. I know that there's quite a few different countries and different languages that are in the mix at this point, so I don't know how any of that's worked out. I'm sorry. Sheriff, would you? No? Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
We had also heard of other cities experiencing similar situations, busing migrants to other areas that were, I want to say, experiencing a less, you know, I feel like we've heard of other cities having the same issue, busing out migrants to other cities to kind of have them deal with it, or just kind of spread everything out. Have you guys experienced that here in Yuma?
Yeah, so our nonprofit, Regional Center for Border Health, does that routinely. They're in connection with a lot of nonprofits throughout Arizona and Southern California, as well as transportation hubs like airports. So that's typically how that's handled. The transportation that the state has provided across country is always to a received NGO that will help people kind of land and get on their feet. So at no time has there been, that I'm aware of, anyone that has just completely just dropped people without some sort of bearing or resource. Yes.
Did you say that the releases tomorrow, that the state is going to provide funding or take care of them, transport them?
I didn't say that.
Okay.
We're working with the state to try to find those mechanisms, those funding sources and resources to get that situation addressed. Anyone else? Yes.
I guess it's for the sheriff or police. Yesterday, the Arizona Sheriff's Association held a press conference talking about resources. How much of your day-to-day resources are dedicated now to the border compared to, you know, just everyday crime that happens within the city itself or county? How much is it now having to be dedicated to border-related issues?
Well, it's not so much now, but what we've been dealing with for the past 2 years, dealing with this crisis on the border. And if you watch the Arizona sheriffs, I appreciated them being the voice for the sheriffs that could not make it up to Phoenix. You know, Sheriff Benzone, Sheriff Lamb, and Sheriff Rose did an outstanding job of articulating our concerns. The main focus was the fact that our citizens need to know that we are all working together, one-on-one, and keeping each other briefed every day on activities. Locally, we've been doing tabletop exercises with fire, EMS, law enforcement, our federal partners in regards to worst-case scenarios and how we can respond with our resources. So, for example, all of my resources now that are down on the border helping fill the gap for our Border Patrol federal partners, they're paid under a grant for overtime. So it's not county monies that we're expending on this. We're utilizing our federal grant monies to be able to do that. So when we respond to the deaths in the desert, we try to track all that and put that towards those grants. So it's not taken away from our officers serving the community on a day-to-day basis. So all the officers that you see that are doing high-profile patrols down along the border, they're there to ensure that there are no state laws being violated, that there are no assaults occurring or kidnappings, which have happened down along the river corridor. So we're there to try to prevent that and also try to stop the illegal, illicit narcotics that are so often being smuggled into the United States, because the cartels orchestrate every bit of what we're seeing today. Make no mistake that they are doing this on purpose, and this administration is well aware of what we're dealing with. We voice our concern each and every day. Sheriffs, chiefs, mayors, you name it. And it's frustrating for us because this administration knows what's going on the border and what the cartels are doing to exploit the weaknesses of our federal border patrol agents. So we as sheriffs are trying to fill that gap to try to intercept the human smuggling and the narcotics smuggling that's going on in the eastern part of our county, I can't speak to the rest of the sheriffs. But that's, when Arizona is known for more than 50% of fentanyl coming into the whole of the United States, that's a serious concern for us. And what frustrates us in law enforcement, especially sheriffs, is that the Secretary of Homeland Security and the President, they defunded ICE. They knew this was coming. They could have put monies into effect to fund ICE, to be able to put this infrastructure into place to adequately house, feed, and go through what's needed for Title VIII requirements. What you're seeing now is there is no Title VIII enforcement being done by this administration. The individuals are just being released into societies. Granted, they're not staying on a border area. But if it's a city that has always portrayed themselves as a sanctuary city, I can guarantee you that that is a place that they put on the shirts of the juveniles that are unaccompanied for them to go to. And that's what's happening. And for anybody to say that what they're doing now is humane, is not humane. We in law enforcement get the intel reports that what's going on over in Mexico. You've seen recently where the cartels kidnapped over 153 people just in San Luis Sonora. And they were trying to get more money out of these folks. The women that are raped, the kids that are violent. That's what we see is going on, and he is well aware of this. Not only the President, but also the Secretary of Homeland Security, whose priority is Homeland Security, border security. And that's frustrating for us as sheriffs. And that's why we have said from the very beginning, what this government will not do, we will, enforcing the rule of law in our states. If somebody trespasses in a farm field, they will be arrested. If they trespass on somebody's property out in the foothills, they will be arrested and charged. You have to have a consequence delivery, otherwise this will not stop. And it's inhumane to know that these individuals from over 70 countries, I think this year, compared to 140 last year that came through Yuma County, and knowing what they're being subjected to by these cartels, that's inhumane to allow that to continue. I hope I answered some of your questions. There's so much, I could stand here all day and cover a lot of this. Chief, do you want to?
Much like the Sheriff's Office, we are part of the Stonewall Grant, and we do have officers who work overtime, that they choose to work that overtime to work on border issues. The police department has training, has had practices over the years, and the dedicated members of this police department know what they need to do to keep everyone in this community safe and to make sure that everyone is treated fairly and constitutionally. And so to say we dedicate resources, dedicated time to making sure that our officers have the proper training, that they react to these situations in a proper manner, and also in planning that in case there is a unknown mass exodus over here to Yuma, that we're going to be able to handle it to make sure the community stays safe and that actually the migrants stay safe too.
I just would like to add one thing. This came up all of a sudden. I did talk with the chief of Border Patrol here locally. She would have loved to have been here, but unfortunately, unless she gets approval from Washington, D.C. to come and meet the press and talk to the public, she has to get that vetted and approved. But to be honest with you, they've been in coordination with us each and every day, giving us updates, and it's worked real well here in Yuma County. So I will tell you that she wishes she could be here, too short notice. But everything that we've told you is information that they share with us on a daily basis.
If anyone could speak to the concerns that the border may become closed, or for the people that come through the port of entry who cross into San Luis, Arizona, they come for work or for school to San Luis, Somerton, Yuma, elsewhere. Just talk about what the message is for that regarding possible border closing, port of entry.
As far as the law enforcement side, we're in communication with the port director, who's in charge of the port of entry. So he said right now they don't ascertain any of that happening unless there's something significant that happens. And we've experienced that in the past with cartel violence that's going on over there right now, where they've had to shut it down for a short period of time for public safety. But there has been no mention from the port director of shutting down the port of entry unless there's a major emergency that's happening.
Yeah, it's always a short duration at this point. The only time I've seen a port shut down any duration would have been in the Del Rio experience, and that was to gain operational control of the border. I don't see that we're at that point, and I would expect every conversation I've had with the port director, his mission is to keep business flowing through both ports. Yes.
Yesterday I asked you if residents should be scared, and you said no. Is that still your feeling?
That is still my feeling. This is not unfettered, so there. I mean, it is. If you go through Border Patrol screening, it's not a perfect screening, obviously, but there is at least some hands and some tracking done. Hands put on people and some tracking done to make sure that we try to weed out all the nefarious individuals. I particularly myself, I'm not concerned, and I would recommend people just to be like you would with anyone else, just eyes open. If you see something, definitely call it in. 911 it works, but to be just afraid as a base level, I would not be. If you see someone doing anything, whether they're a migrant or a resident, you should have the same response.
How often do we? How often do we see migrants stopping at that area that you guys have set up and turning themselves into Border Patrol agents versus the amount of people that run or try to, get into the city and neighborhoods?
So the overwhelming majority turn themselves in. If you go to the border about 4 in the morning, you'll see them lining up in order to be interdicted. Those that are looking to evade are generally either carrying drugs or they're some sort of gang or nefarious member. And so I don't know if I don't have any numbers. Sheriff, do you have any sense on gotaways?
So from what I understand back, as far as April numbers, you had 119,000 that were apprehended along the river corridor by Border Patrol. And I want to say it was roughly 1,000 getaways that they know of. And usually that's typically out towards the eastern part of the county where we see the smuggling of narcotics and individuals being smuggled in as well. So the numbers as far as getaways, according to the chief, have gone down because of what's going on now. Our fear is that they're going to start going up.
Any other questions? Yes.
Have you been in contact with mayors from any of the other cities in Arizona about resources they might be able to provide, transportation, infrastructure? You mentioned it might help if migrants went to larger cities.
We've talked in general over the years, and particularly as this situation ramps up, we've talked in generalities. Because it's really a federal issue, I don't know a single mayor who's going to commit their local funds for that willingly, but it's really the connections to the nonprofits in those communities that are critical, because that's where the potential reimbursement can happen, and really the infrastructure of how you house people and transport people would be more effective. All right. With that, I appreciate your time. Stay close. We'll have more information as it's done. Thank you.
Look at that.